David, hi, and welcome to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so great to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you. Likewise. It's good to be joining you guys today.
Yes, it's wonderful, David. We were so pleased to see the work you do, because we've been doing a lot of bits and pieces around ADHD, and of course, interestingly, the relationships between autism and ADHD, and some of the things going on there. You've written a fabulous book, ADHD Refocused, which we want to recommend to everybody, and we want you to talk about a bit. But can you give us a bit of a background? What brought you into this area? What led you to write a book? Because we know what it's like to write a book. It's a hell of a thing. So can you give us a bit of background, and then we want to sort of get down to the weeds of what you're doing with the work.
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to give you some of that context. So by profession, I'm a clinical psychologist. I got my doctorate degree in clinical psychology back in the early 2000s, and actually right at the foot of graduate school, I was facing a point where my resources were not meeting the demands that were being placed on me. Whereas up until then, while the demands may have been high, I was able to, without realizing it, I was working at the last minute, procrastinating, but getting my deadlines, met. I was pulling all-nighters, but pulling good grades enough. So, and whatever the kind of quirks that I utilized academically were well enough to get me through until they weren't. And when I was in graduate school, I learned from a professor that what I was struggling with was perhaps due to ADHD, and he sent me off to get evaluated. And there's a longer story about me failing a class and him salvaging me from that. And that's all covered in I talk about it in the book. And that's when I learned that ADHD. And from that point on, I started to look into the adult world of ADHD, and there was nothing. This was early 2000s. Much of nothing was out there. And I realized that was a big void. And I decided from that point on, I was going to dedicate all of my kind of clinical focus to ADHD. And, fast forward, as you know, in terms of being in this kind of academic world, getting a book out is a great kind of goal to try to achieve. And so I set out to do it. And it only took me 5 years to finally get it all together and get this beautiful, book out into the world. And that's what kind of led me to lean into this book. And that's what I do professionally. I work with adults who have ADHD all day long.
That's fantastic.
This lived experience, Matt, we're seeing this beautifully in some of the work, because we've had these different lived experiences. Yeah, what are you thinking, Matt?
Oh, I just want to jump in and let's talk about the focus of the book. No pun intended, or maybe there is a pun intended.
Actually, we chose this image on the book on the cover, which is like this experience of things being all jumbled up, and the sense when this vision came to me was all these wires. When you go into the drawer and you pull out that ball of wires, right? Now we cut cords and we're wireless, but in the days of wires, it would be all tangled up. And I felt like that was the experience of having ADHD, was sometimes it feels like you're all, wrapped up in your own wiring, and it's hard to kind of tease things out. And my goal with the book was to try to help give people, move from this point of tanglement to a focused clarity, where there's like a sharp way of achieving focus. And so I lay out in the book a lot of different methods, and very, very importantly, mindsets to achieve this state of focus. I talk about moving from clarity to chaos as kind of the goal of the work. And so I cover a lot of ground in terms of cognitive therapy, behavior therapy, mindfulness, meditation, technology, living with technology in balance, so on and so forth, to help my listeners, my viewers, my readers understand what it's like to live more successfully with a higher probability of success with their ADHD.
I know it feels like you kind of get in your own way. I've had the good fortune in many respects to sort of come in my extended family. We think about ADHD amongst our own. We look at where we're going, and you've talked about these various mechanisms, these various mindsets. I know with one of our boys that what was the key element. He's been my big experiment over 20 years, of bringing in curiosity, sort of shifting from that defeated, confused mindset to almost going, oh, that's interesting. I'm making myself stupid now. What are some of these mindsets that you're talking about that can help you get at, stop creating your own blocks?
Yeah, a very important initial mindset is to first understand, is this even a challenge you're facing, right? Is it defined as ADHD, or maybe you're in that subgroup of people that I talk about that experience what I've labeled techno ADD, the experience that today all modern, many modern adults are walking around with their devices close at hand, are also distracted and having multiple lines of focus, and not being able to sustain attention for long periods of time, etc. So first of all, understanding where you might fall on that spectrum, right? If we're going to talk about an ADHD to techno ADD spectrum, and that's a mindset to understand where we stand. And then to also understand that regardless of which one you fall into, we're talking about it's a daily grind. It's a daily effort to manipulate what I call the levers. Imagine you walk into a room and the lights are off. You're going to a big arena, and by default, the lights are off. The soundboard is down, the lights are down. Every day, the crew has to walk in and adjust the lights, turn this one on, this hue, that brightness. And that's what it's like to live with ADHD or techno ADD. Every day we have to show up and work those levers, and just realizing that that's part of the commitment for success changes the experience of living with ADHD. So that's an example of a mindset. I'll give you one more before we move on to kind of a follow-up, is understanding that perfection cannot really be a driving force in ADHD. If we aim for 100%, we're very often going to trip. We're going to be disappointed. We're going to have shame and guilt, etc. I have a big belief in 80 being the new 100. I adjust the framing or the bullseye, not just the center, but a few circles out is what I'm really aiming for. Because if I hit 80% and that's my A, well, that means that 60% is kind of like my A minus or B plus, and that's good enough. And I need to think about adjusting my expectations so that I give myself credit for the successes and the wins that I do have as I go through. So those are just two mindsets. Mindfulness would be a whole nother topic.
Now, on that last point, though, you've done some serious postgraduate studies. So what was your experience there, where the aim always is, to get the highest marks, to try and reach perfection in everything that you're doing in that academic world?
Well, it's a great question, Matt. I actually don't. When I got into graduate school, that's when I dropped the 100%. In university studies, in college, let's say, the 4.0, there's a sense of I need to get the high GPA because that's might be what I'm evaluated towards. In graduate school, I think grades are not as important, so I was able to adjust myself. But for those for whom they do need to strive for that 4.0 or those performance reviews at work, or it can be challenging. And so what I do encourage people to do is lean into that 80%. Yes, there is such a thing as 100, and I might hit 100, but I'll have a better chance hitting 100 if I focus towards 80. Because in reality, if I hit 80 more consistently, or even the 70, I will feel better about myself. The guilt, the shame, the anxiety, the depression will reduce if I'm hitting more stride. And that will allow me to have a couple of those moments where I maybe hit that 100, which, by the way, in ADHD happens very often under pressure. It's when we're under pressure, under their deadline to make something happen, that we oftentimes hit 120. And that's a very powerful upside of the ADHD experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just hearing a couple of things and reminding the similarities in my experience working with our boys. And one of the things which was really important that you mentioned a bit earlier was a person that came in who was really understanding and helpful. You had your professor. We had with one of our boys, he went, the school system failed him miserably. They would just sit him up the back, and he was a go to sleep type of ADHD. Under pressure, he would just go to sleep. But he went, and he said, oh, I can't do this and I can't do that. And those defeatist attitudes. And one of the teachers just said, "Oh, I'll help you." And besides the fact that he did help him, what was fascinating for our boy was that he was so startled that someone would help him. He'd written himself off. And this is part of the sort of the psychology or the affective disorder that you can give yourself. When you mention them, shame, guilt, so on and so forth. How does someone get around those things? It's kind of get them to the place where they can start. Is it really that wonderful person? What are some of the thoughts you have about that?
So you use the word get around. And I think that the way that I encourage people is to get through rather than around, right? We have to go through those emotions, right? So, these are byproducts of ADHD. These are common byproducts of ADHD that we're mentioning, these emotional experiences. There are occasions clinically where a person might have a standalone challenge with depression or a standalone challenge with anxiety or trauma and whatnot. And we have to approach in those situations a bit differently in a bifurcated way. But when the byproducts come out as a result of, and it is very often what brings people to therapy with me, is that they're seeing the byproducts, but then we learn, ADHD is at the helm of all this, and it's causing the wake, right? And so what we try to do is first educate people about their emotions, name them, label them, identify them, right? Acknowledge that I'm experiencing this emotion and that it is not, I am not the emotion, we commonly say. I am not the anxiety. The anxiety is with me, or it's visiting me. I love to talk about in the book an analogy of driving a bus, and that I think about myself as the bus driver. I have my cap on, I get on the bus, I get behind the wheel, and sure enough, passengers get on that bus. These passengers are my emotions, the anxiety, the guilt, the shame, and they have voices, and they say things like, "You're no good. You're going to do terrible on this podcast. You're going to embarrass us all." And they yell at us, and they berate us. And what we need to try to do is remind ourselves that this, and we remind them too, hello, everyone on the bus, this is my bus. This is David's bus, and he's driving. You're welcome as passengers, but we'll remind you, you will all have your time, and you'll step off that bus, and you'll get back on and off and on and off and on. But I am the driver that stays consistently controlling the wheel and making sure that we don't veer off the path. Because if I do listen to them and I think that they took over the bus, well, you know where that goes.
I love that, Matt. That's great.
That's beautiful. Now I have to ask you, because this idea of techno ADHD, in my mind, there is a whole generation now that has techno ADHD. What's your perception in this world of, technology and social media? What's going on from your perspective?
Oh, that's a big topic, right?
Yeah. So, we want it in 3 minutes. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
no pressure.
No problem. I'll do my best. In brief, we are at a stage in society's development where we now have, there are multiple large power influencers. Technology is now top of the heap, right? And today we have AI as the next iteration of what that technology is doing to us. And it is essentially a relationship, and I always use that language. It's a relationship that we have with our devices and social media, and that we have to become more aware of, to develop awareness of the relationship between me and the device. Because if not, the dopamine loop that we get into, meaning the craving to get that feedback, the FOMO that we have, the fear of missing out that we have, the sense that we're not good enough, the sense that there's always something else out there that I could tap into, this is really going to siphon off our ability to stay focused in a moment, right? I happen to be a observant Jew. So I'm Jewish, and I observe the Sabbath. And on the Sabbath, I unplug. I don't use my phone. I don't use a computer. We don't even watch television in my house. We really go for it. We really embrace this idea of like unplugging for one day a week. And it's powerful. I have four little kids, 10 to 2 years old. And they too are unplugged from their devices. And that one day we see their revitalization of their true deep spirit. And it's powerful. And the 6 other days, we fail miserably at it. But at least we have a sense of what it might be like to keep that relationship acknowledged as something that I can keep a space from.
Yeah,
Right,
these
right.
rituals that are through most religious circuits, that they're also through a number of other different styles and types of living, and I think this, certainly I feel this was the reason for the huge rise of mindfulness.
Yes.
And you mentioned that. I want to just sort of look at that a bit, because it's so much of those things that are good for us now and that are bad for us now have been good for us and bad for us for hundreds of thousands, if not, millions of years, and have evolved in. And mindfulness is another a thing that I often say, we didn't start mindfulness, we just restarted it. And it's also that thing of why we stopped. And as you're saying, the technology becomes this external influence. But how do you talk and address the usefulness of mindfulness for those as one of those methods and one of those rituals that gets you out of the technology, or out of this frenzied focus?
So many years ago, a couple of years after learning about my ADHD and having tried medication for a while, and I was beginning to practice yoga a little bit, I found my way towards a training in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT. I was trained by a man named Zindel Siegel, who was a disciple of John Kabat-Zinn. Okay?
Yeah.
And I went on his 5-day retreat for therapists. And we sat at 6 a.m. for like a 45-minute sit or 25-minute sit. And I was tortured. And my mind was exploding. And I had monkeys and elephants and cars and the sounds of the birds, and it was like, and I went up to Zindel the first day and I said, this is not for me. I don't know, I have ADHD. You think I can sit down on a cushion and impossible. This is not built for me. And he said, it is exactly built for you. And I from that, and there was no research done at that point of mindfulness and ADHD, but now it's ample, that this ability for us to switch off of autopilot, to move away from just going about our day without pausing to be aware of the day or aware of the experience of the day, is challenging. So we need to take a handle of the control switch, like I talked about before, and flip it from autopilot to manual mode. And now when I'm in manual mode and I can slow down and observe my circus mind, or I can slow down and observe, like I talked about with a client today, who she was shaking her leg constantly during our meeting. And I said, let's take that as the focal point of observing your ADHD hyperactivity and focus on your leg shaking. Or another client who speeds a lot, because it's common in ADHD. Watch your speed as the indicator to flip the switch from auto to manual mode. And in that way, you strengthen your capacity of awareness. And ADHD is a deficit of awareness. Think about that. The deficit of awareness or attention. And mindfulness is training us in awareness and directing of that awareness with intention. So it's very powerful. We can go on and on. I know we don't have as much time, but it is worth anyone out there, all of our listeners who are listening to this now, please, if you don't know about mindfulness, go out there, learn about it. My book talks about it. We have an app called Agave Health for the ADHD community that talks a lot about mindfulness, and many other places that you can learn about mindfulness. Check it out.
And just as a quick add, I know you've got something there, Matt, but one of the things I talked about, people say, well, you say this mindfulness has been around forever. What are you talking about? And I said, well, you think about it. Every day we practice this as a species, and as species before us. At the end of the day, sunset would come along. We would stop working because we couldn't see this marvelous, amazing, focus-driven thing that we could do. Looked at it, and then we stopped and ate and told stories and reflected, and then we just invented the electric light and business pressure and commercialism and everything else, and we let it go. Yeah. So if anybody wonders what mindfulness is, just do that. Just go to it, watch a sunset, and you'll get an inkling of the naturalness of it. But we need to enhance it, and we need to use the thing. So that's just a thought there. So I just wanted to throw that in.
I love that. I've never heard, Richard, that way of understanding the advent of where we were naturally built into a mindful experience. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Now, just very quickly, I want your take on pharmaceuticals, medical model, all of that approach to ADHD, and how do you work with that? Yeah, what's your take?
In brief, I always explain to people that there are, if there are tools available to help us in the ADHD space, I am encouraging people to explore them under the right guidance and supervision. Medication certainly being a long-standing, validated tool for working with ADHD in both children, adolescents, and adults, right? And so I explain this to people, especially if you're trepidatious and you're nervous. If you find the right clinician, and that's a challenge in and of itself, but you can find the right prescriber who understands ADHD, not your general practitioner who maybe is kind of pulling things off the shelf, but someone with a deep awareness of ADHD, who knows about the various types of medications. Try them, try it out with their guidance, because you can always stop. You can always decide that isn't for me. It wasn't the right effect. I don't like that feeling. And you can also try to figure out a way to let it be one among your tools. Don't skip the skills for the pills. I tell people, don't skip the skills just for the pills, right?
That's
because good. It is a great way to get gas in the tank. I just going back to my meditation training. I used to be on 70 milligrams of Vyvanse. For those out there listening with ADHD will know that's a very high dose of ADHD medication. I didn't know better. My prescriber said we could go there. It seemed like I needed it. After I got trained in meditation, I started practicing, and then I got into yoga and practiced yoga very regularly and steadily. My medication dropped down to 5 milligrams of a short-acting cousin called Adderall. And these days I use it as needed. So everyone needs to find their relationship with that tool, along with other tools like cognitive behavior therapy, meditation and mindfulness, self-forgiveness. Most powerful tool is being self-forgiving of the days that just don't go well, which will happen even to the best of us. And so I'm all about trying out the tools that are out there.
And I think what's important also, there's one of the things that we talk about to therapists, because a lot of people are listening to therapists, and I can, hopefully they've taken some fabulous notes of things that they can, key elements they can tap into. But you're not a prescriber. So I have a lot of therapists, counselors, and psychotherapists say, well, I'm not a prescriber, so I don't need to know that. But we suggest, particularly, we talk about it in our Science of Psychotherapy book, yes, you do need to know about that. You need to at least know about the chemicals. And one of the things is it tells us, as you say, the type of experience that the client is going through. But it also gives you a bit of an insight into what their physician or psychiatrist is actually thinking, what their style is. And so that's really important. And that'll be a fabulous part of the book for people to catch up on and just become knowing of. So we really thank you for talking about that. And I love that. Try it. You can stop. You can start. You're not an automaton.
It's not always the same with all conditions. Like there's certain challenges, like bipolar disorder, not so simple to start and stop. That's why I say that happens with ADHD medications. If you're on the stimulant side, it's fairly easy with the proper guidance to start and stop. Really, you can take 2 days on and 3 days off. It's not the same with other kind of mental health challenges. So that's why I want to put that asterisk on my comment, that it is specific to ADHD medications of the stimulant class with the guidance of your prescriber.
Which is, again, another thing that therapists needs to become aware of, so that they're not they're not creating opinions. Now, we've got to wrap up shortly, which is always a nuisance, but I think it gives us a good, succinct discussion. But I get the feeling from we've hit on a bunch of points, and I don't think there's like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's just sort of a set of points. In fact, I'm almost seeing them like a sphere of possibilities. Is it really what I would imagine, that every client is very individual, that which element you hit on first? What's that experience for you, the dealing, once we've got these elements together, applying those to the needs of a client?
So as it happens, there are 2 or 3 things that I consistently teach every client, everyone. The first is the foundation of planning, a planning system. And I developed a system based off of a plan, something called a planner pad, which I always give credit to, as I found it 20 years ago and I loved it. It's using a funnel down 3-tier organization system where you think about your life. This is my one that I'm using this week. My life is categories: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have cutaways. This is my life. The 7 or 8 categories of my stuff that I need to do this month. And then from there, I funnel down to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. In my whole life, I could get it onto one paper. Even if I have a million other things, this gives me a starting point to externalize my thoughts and my responsibilities, and a place where I can manipulate it, right, externally, and then to break it down into small steps, which is what you do, deciding what to do today. And then there's a third tier that's kind of like an hour by hour flow as well. So I teach that to every client because it's the foundation of effectively living with ADHD is externalization of organization, right? So that's one. I teach it to every client. I do think that learning about mindfulness is essential for every, for all my clients as well, encompassing the self-compassion. Got to forgive yourself for the bad days because they're going to be there no matter what, no matter how awesome you are at this game. It's a game of shoots and ladders. You move through those squares or snakes and ladders, right? You're going to fall down and have to kind of regroup. It's just a natural order of things. And then the third thing that I try to teach every client is also understand your emotions, like we talked about earlier. So those are 3 things that I think everybody with ADHD or techno ADD as well should really dial into. And again, I cover all of it in the book. And I think we did a pretty good job at it.
Well, we've done that with all our kids, haven't we, Matt, in various forms, just externalizing the structure, so it doesn't become part of the internal jumble.
I need to do that for myself. I know I don't have ADHD. I need to, I rely on my calendar to break everything down into those components like you were just describing. Well, David, look, it's been brilliant meeting you and learning about what you do and your book, ADHD Refocused. Everybody, there will be a link in the show notes if you want to jump across and check David out and his book. But thank you for joining us here on the Science of Psychotherapy.
Been my pleasure, guys. Really my pleasure.
Yeah, wonderful to talk to you.